be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "In those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give off its light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of the sky. Learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches become tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
One night, a number of years ago, more than 100 million television viewers saw the movie The Day After. Filmed in Lawrence, Kansas, it showed what that city would look like after a nuclear attack. Just before the film began, a warning flashed on the screen saying, "Because of the graphic portrayal of nuclear war, this film may be unsuitable for children. Parental discretion is advised." The warning was well stated, because during the next 128 minutes, the movie showed shocking scenes of death and destruction, and the script also was shocking and disturbing. It made us realize that the horror of nuclear war was greater than any of us have ever imagined. The words and images of today's gospel remind us of the words and images of that film. Jesus talks about the end of all those things that are the very foundation of our universe. And for this reason, the church uses the gospel passage as one of its readings at the end of this liturgical year. It wants us to think about the end of the world. It wants us to reflect on that moment when the world, as we know it, will pass away. It wants us to ask ourselves the question, how prepared will we be for that moment when it comes? So let's do that together right now. Let's choose just one part of the Christian life. Let's choose the most important one. That is love. Let's ask ourselves 3 questions about love. How loving are our thoughts at this time of our life? How loving are our words at this time of our life? How loving are our actions at this time of our life? First of all, our thoughts. Think about just one feature of our thoughts. How judgmental are we in our thoughts about other people? Do we tend to set ourselves above other people? Do we tend to pass judgment on them? Judgment is that is often unkind and unfair. There's a story about a priest a story that a priest told about himself. He was riding on a bus in a southern state, and his seat was facing across the aisle. And as he was riding along, he was praying his breviary, which is the prayer book that priests use. And when he looked up, he saw a woman facing him across the aisle with a smile on her face that seemed to be cynically saying, "Isn't this nice? We're saying our prayers." Oh, the priest tried to ignore the lady, but he thought that this was just another example of anti-Catholicism. When he looked up again, the woman was still there with that same smile, and he was just about ready to say to her, "Look, lady, if my praying bothers you, I'll stop." But just at that moment, another lady came from further back in the bus and took the first lady by the hand and said, "Come on, dearie, this is where we get off." And she led the woman off the bus. And the priest realized with a shock that the first lady was blind. And not only was she not judging the priest, but she was just trying her best to look pleasant. The story makes us ask ourselves, do we tend to read into situations? Do we tend to judge others recklessly, the way that the priest on the bus did? And that brings us to the second point, our words in our speech. Again, let's think about just one aspect of our words and speech. Do we use our speech to talk about the faults of other people? Do we use it to gossip about other people? Maybe you've heard the story about the three church leaders, a Catholic priest, a Protestant minister, and a Jewish rabbi. And all were from the same small town. And they decided to make a retreat together. And in the course of the retreat, they shared with each other one of their more embarrassing shortcomings. And the Catholic priest said, "Well, I have to tell you both that I've been drinking a little lately." And the Jewish rabbi said, "And I have to tell you both that I've been gambling a little bit lately." And finally, the Protestant minister said, "And I have to tell you both that I'm an incurable gossip, and I can't keep a thing to myself." And that story makes us ask ourselves, do we use our speech to gossip about other people? And that brings us to our third point, our actions. Again, let's consider just one aspect of our actions, the one that the gospel said is the most important of all, and that is helping other people. Some years ago, 9 physically handicapped people successfully climbed Mount Rainier in Washington State. One of the climbers had an artificial leg. Another climber was an epileptic. 2 others were deaf, and 5 were blind. In spite of their handicaps, these 9 people negotiated the 14,000-foot mountain together. It's the second highest mountain in the 48 southern states, I guess you'd say. And they went up and down without any accident. And when he was asked about this amazing feat, one of the blind members of the party just said, "We got a lot of help from one another." And that story makes us ask ourselves, how much are we willing to help one another in our mutual effort to climb the mountain that leads to God and to heaven? And so we come back to the original question. How prepared are we to meet Jesus at the end of the world or at the end of our life, whichever comes first? How prepared are we to meet him right now in these 3 areas of our life? First, our thoughts. Do we judge other people unjustly? Secondly, our words. Do we talk about other people unkindly? And finally, our actions. Do we turn our backs on the needs of other people? If we aren't doing too well in these areas now, what can we do to make sure that we will be better prepared when we come to that final meeting with Jesus? Let's close now with a prayer. Lord, give us a mind that will think thoughts that are kind and fair. Give us lips that will speak words that are true and charitable. Give us hands that will help our sisters and brothers in their needs, as you did for the people in your own lifetime.